Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very good afternoon to you, and lovely to be with you here this afternoon. Great to see such a wonderful turnout. Our guest of honour this afternoon is someone I've had the pleasure of interviewing probably, must be nearly in the hundreds of times now since I took my current role 10 or 12 years ago. And on each occasion, it's never failed to be thought-provoking or come away something maybe a little bit wiser than when I started. So I'm sure today will be absolutely no exception. Obviously, he's been very much in the news this year with his retirement after an incredible career as a national hunt jockey, the greatest there has ever been. So without further ado, please give a very warm Belfast welcome to today's guest of honour, the legendary 20-time champion jockey, AP McCoy.
Good afternoon, Deputy First Minister, ladies and gentlemen.
Turns out you're quite a popular fella, AP, it seems.
Only here, normally. I don't know where I'm more popular now that I've retired or where I was more popular when I was riding. I think there's a lot of people that are quite happy that I'm retired. A lot of my ex-colleagues are quite happy that I'm retired anyway.
It's an interesting point to start on because, to be fair, it's not something that necessarily sits all that well with you, the measure of popularity you've gained, is it?
No, when I started off wanting to become a jockey, I didn't do it for, I wanted to be good at it, I left home when I was 15 and I knew that if I wanted to be good at it, Gary, I'm obviously from the North Fire, I'm obviously from here, from a place called Moneyglass, which is in Antrim, and I knew that if I wanted to be good as a jockey, I was going to have to leave home, and I wasn't very good at school, so that was another reason. And it's funny, my dad was very much more supportive of it than my mother. Someone asked me recently that my mother said, "What would you like him to do?" And she said, "I'd like him to be a priest." Well, there was not much chance of that happening, but being from where I'm from, Guy, there was probably more chance of me being an astronaut than a jockey because there was no one around the area that had any horses or had anything to do with them. But my dad, for some bizarre reason, decided, he was a joiner, that he wanted to get a horse and started to breed from it. And I've got 4 sisters and 1 brother, and they have no interest in horses. They've never ridden them. Yet there's a picture of me at home when I was on a horse when I was 2. Don't ask me why, don't know. But a friend of my dad's then decided he wanted to, a local trainer or a fella nearby wanted to buy one of these horses that my dad had bred anyway, and so that's how they become friendly, and I started to go there at the weekends. Actually, it's a funny story. His name was Billy Rock. He's dead now, but he was a great man. But I'm a Catholic, but he was a Protestant, and he used to tell my mother during my summer holidays that he was going to take me off on the 12th of July and dress me up as an orange man.
So you probably ended up wearing orange a bit as a jockey in your time, did you?
Yeah, exactly. So. But Billy Rock had great belief in me, you know what I mean? And the one thing I found in my life is that I've never thought that I was arrogant, or I never thought for one moment that I was better than anyone else. But inwardly, I always had belief that I was gonna, even when I was 15, even when I left home when I was 15, I always had the belief that I was gonna be a jockey. I always believed that I was gonna be good at it. And I spent 4.5 years in Jim Bulger's. And I think in 4.5 years I rode 12 winners. I have, I'm not bragging it, but in England I have ridden 12 winners in 4 days once. So I don't know what I was doing for the 4.5 years that I was in Jim Bulger's, but
to be fair, we should point out now for those who aren't familiar with the man, Jim Bulger would have a reputation, shall we say, of being a hard taskmaster, wouldn't he?
Yeah, you could say that again. I actually thought I hated school, but I hated Jim Bulger more than I hated school.
We're before the watershed now here, obviously.
Yeah, but I actually did hate him at the time when I was working for him. But he was a great. Jim Bulger, was a genius of a man. He taught me a lot of things about trying to get better, trying to improve. He was a very tough disciplinarian. Everything had to be perfect, and I found that helped me when I went to England because. After my first year being champion jockey, I got a job with a fella called Martin Pipe, who was 15 times champion trainer, and everyone said about how difficult Martin Pipe was to work for. There'd been Richard Dunwoody had worked for him who was champion jockey, had worked for him for a year and a half and hated him. David Bridgewater lasted 9 months or whatever, When I started working for Martin Pipe, he was like a saint compared to Jim Bulger. So
You're great friends to this day, I think, aren't you?
yeah, we are. And I'm
Martin,
actually,
not Jim, I should point out.
I'm actually very friendly with Jim too, because I keep reminding him. He tortured me for 4.5 years, but as a kid, it definitely done me good. But Jim, as I said, had a lot of emphasis on trying to improve yourself and make yourself better. And I found that Jim was a very high achieving man, and I felt that I learned an awful lot from him.
Yeah. And I mean, the qualities you required to achieve all that you have in your glittering career as a jockey, to be fair, I would imagine many of those were initiated in your days at Jim Bulger. For example, the pain threshold. I mean, this is something that jump jockeys have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, getting bad falls. You've probably broken just about every bone in your body, but was some story just remind me of breaking your leg at Jim Bulger's, was it?
Yeah, I broke my leg when I was about 17 when I was in Jim Bulger's, and I had a compound fracture of my tib and fib, which basically had come out through the skin, and my foot was on. I don't mean to put you off your lunch. You've had your lunch, so I don't want to bring your lunch back up again. But it came out through the skin. It was underneath. Basically, my foot was underneath my backside. But I was lying at the bottom of the gallop. I'd actually been at home for. It was in the 2nd of January. I'd been at home for New Year's, and one of the lads came down to tell him that I'd broke my leg, and he came to me. He says, "How do you know your leg is broke?" You know what I mean? I'm thinking. Anyway. But about a couple of years later, and I told him that I was leaving, that I wanted to go to England, I wanted to become a jump jockey. And he said to me, he said, "You're not tough enough to be a jump jockey. I saw you crying like a baby at the bottom of my gallop." He said, "That happens to jump jockeys every day." He said, "You have no chance of making it." I went, "Okay then." Anyway, I proceeded to leave anyway. But I left Jim Bulger at the end of July 1994, and I met him. That was during the Galway races, was the last time I worked for him. And I met him a year later at the Galway races, and I had ridden over 100 winners in less than a year. And Jim says to me, he said, "Well done with all your winners, but you'd have learned an awful lot more if you stayed working for me for a bit longer." So that's, and he actually was deadly serious. It wasn't, you know, that was Jim Bulger for you. But I was lucky in my life, Gary, that I work for people like that, because they make you better. You know, they do make you better. And I think having worked for him and then having worked for Martin Pipe was a genius of a man. You know, he a lot of people, I remember when I started working for him at first, about 8 or 10 years earlier, there was a big thing on the Cook report about they reckoned he was blood doping horses and doing all sorts of crazy things. Martin Pipe was a bootmaker's son, and he went to the races quite a lot as a young lad, and went to bet the horses and have a few quid in them and that. And he always used to look at them and think they were all fat, and he said there was no way that he could back in him. So he said to his dad, "I'm going to train a horse." And he read up about how athletes basically train themselves, and one of them was Emil Zabatek, and he started reading about him and how he intervally trained himself and got himself fit by less work, and he started to do that. And he used to get horses off all these other trainers that couldn't win, and they'd be winning, like they'd jump out and make the run and they'd be gone. And that's why everyone thought that, how can the horses go that fast and keep going that? We're just so much fitter than themselves, so much fitter than everyone else had them. And working for someone like him, he broke a lot of records, you know, and he helped me get to a point where I became a bit like him. You know, I was lucky the first, like I said, when I was a kid growing up, all I wanted to be was champion jockey, you know, and you'd never say it outwardly because you don't think it's ever going to happen. But when I was champion jockey once, I didn't sort of give myself a pat in the back and think, "Oh, that was great." I was worried that it was going to be once, and you know, once only, and my ambition was to be champion jockey again. And when I started off, Richard Dunwoody was the best jockey riding, but he was the toughest bloke you'd ever meet. He was so mentally tough. I remember when he retired, he went walking across the North Pole with 4 exhibitionists. 2 of them got airlifted out of it and couldn't carry on because it was so cold and they'd lost it. And he's so thick that he just carried on with another fella. And got, you know, he was about 10 sort of stone as a jockey, but when he retired, he got to about 12.5 stone. When he came back from the North Pole, he was 9.5 stone at him. Looked terrific, but rather than give in, he decided he'd carry on, you know. But I learned a lot from him in terms of toughness, and I knew if I wanted to be to be a champion jockey, I had to have a good pain threshold. So I got used to pain.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the weight there with Richard Dunmuddy, because I think a lot of people, maybe people who don't even follow racing, would be aware that weight is a very important factor for a jockey. And you're, let's face it, not exactly the perfect physical build for a jockey. You're a bit too tall for a start. How difficult a job and how much discipline was required for you to get yourself down to those weights that had to be made on a regular basis?
Weight's a big thing, because if you can't do the weight, you can't do the job. So it's not like you have a choice in the matter. If you want to work, you have to do the weight. I used to try and keep my weight about 10.3, 10.4, something like that. When I was injured, I broke my back in 2008. I went up to nearly 12 stone in about 6 weeks. So you have to be very careful about how you maintain your weight. I used to go on a bike in the morning sort of for half an hour, literally go flat out, getting myself sweating, have a hot bath for an hour every day. I'd hot bath every day for 20 years. You'd be going out for dinner at night. You'd be thinking, do I eat this? Do I not eat this? I've got light weights tomorrow. You know, I used to go to dinners at night with my wife and leave her at 11 o'clock and be gone home, because it was 7 days a week. And if I wanted to be champion jockey, it was numerical. So I had to go 7 days a week, just because I had ridden 2,000 winners or 3,000 winners beforehand. There was always going to be someone that was going to want to be champion jockey as much as me. So, and I always wanted to be champion jockey. So you'd leave dinners at 11 o'clock at night, or you'd be picking at things and thinking, do I eat it or do I not eat it? You'd wake up in the morning 3 or 4 pounds heavier than you were, and you'd have to lose it. So there was a lot of. Now that I'm retired, those are things that I don't miss.
I was going to say, what's the weight now? What's the latest from the scales in the McCoy household?
I actually weighed myself the other day and it was 11.3, so it wasn't too bad. It was
That's a lot less than I was expecting.
Yeah, I was quite pleased with that. Bearing in mind I was 10 stone 5 and retired about 2 months ago. But so yeah, so it's not too bad. But those are things I don't miss. I don't miss that. I don't miss traveling. Because it was 7 days a week, I'd be in the car every day. I was very lucky that I had someone driving me, but you still, because it was in the winter time, it was very difficult to fly anywhere that was far away, because the last race would be half 3 and it would be dark, so you couldn't fly, so you'd have to drive. You could be in the car regularly 7 or 8 hours a day in England. So the travelling was something that was tough. But to say, if I wanted to be champion jockey, you had to do it. And those first few years that I was champion jockey, lots of people have been champion jockey a few times, you know what I mean? I didn't want to be like everyone else. I wanted to, when I was lucky enough to work for Martin Pipe, I got myself in a position where I could possibly ride more winners than anyone else could. So I always set myself goals and I always had targets, you know. I never was able to relax. There was a lot of my life. There's a lot of times when I look back on my life, I actually think I missed so much of it, or I should have. And I enjoyed every time I won, but not probably for long enough, because I was always frightened that it might be the last one. You know, it would never last, you know.
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on some of the injuries involved there. On occasion, let's be blunt about it, those injuries can be very severe. I mean, you're here in one piece today, which is great. You've got out of the game, you know, physically intact. But on occasion, there have been some really serious injuries in recent years for jockeys. And in 1 or 2 instances, a couple of guys have died as well. I mean, how do you deal with that as a jockey, seeing your colleagues suffer those consequences? And how does it affect you? I mean, were you ever affected badly mentally by it?
When I went to England first, I worked for a man called Toby Balding, and there was a lad there called Richard Davis who basically was like me, young lad trying to get going. He was kind of my opposition in the yard, if you like, but we were very good friends. He got a fall one day at Subtle in 1996. Went to see him in Almonsham. They said he was pretty bad, but was conscious, was able to talk to a whole lot. But they said there was no point going to hospital with him, because you know that they were going to be looking after him. So he didn't. But I was on my way home, and to this day I can remember getting the phone call I was sitting at the traffic lights in Newbury, and someone told me he had died. And that is the hardest part of the job. But you don't ever think it's going to happen to you. You know, you don't ever happen. You know yourself. There's 2 lads, 2 first cousins in the last 3 years, and John Thomas McNamara is paralysed from the neck down. His first cousin, the Thursday night before the Grand National meeting this year, got a very serious injury at Wexford, and he's
Two other good friends of yours, now we should point out.
yeah, are both, and he's possibly paralysed from the waist down, you know. But you don't think about it. I had a lot of injuries. I always thought I was going to. I don't know where I'm not that bright or what, but I used to think when I got injured, I thought I was a bit unlucky, and I always used to think I was unbreakable. You know, and every time I ended up in the ambulance, I thought, oh well, I've had a good run, like I deserve. You know, it was going to happen at some point. You know, I've broken my ankle, my leg, my arm, my wrist, punctured my lungs, broken all my ribs. I've got metal in my back between T9 and T12. That was probably the worst. You know, I got a fall one day in Warwick and fractured, you know, basically broke the middle of my back. And you're lying on the ground for 3 or 4 minutes and you can't feel anything. You do think the worst then, and then you hope that at some point the feeling in your legs or arms is going to come back. And lucky for me it did. And the crazy thing about it was I begged the doctor in the John Radcliffe in Oxford Hospital. He was going to put me in a body cast, and it happened on the 12th of January. He was going to put me in a body cast, and whether I was high on morphine or what, I don't know, but I persuaded him to operate on me because the Cheltenham Festival was basically 8 weeks away, and I managed to get him to operate on me, and he put metal down between T9 and T12 either side of my spine, and I was back on a horse in less than 7. I was back riding out in 7. I was back in 7.5 weeks, and he said it was impossible. So, you know, there's different. A lot of injuries like that. It's different. You know, it's different with other things in life or other medical things in life that are not a lot in the head, but a lot of injuries like that are in the head. You know, you can actually get your head around to making things happen. You know, and I went to 2 neurosurgeons in London because the jockey club at the time said that it wasn't possible that someone could be getting back on horse after 7.5 weeks, and they sent me to 2 neuro specialists in London, and both of them couldn't believe how healthy and how well I'd healed in that short space of time. So, you know, I was always one of those people that I actually found it a challenge to get better. I didn't actually think when I got injured that, oh God, I'm injured, I'm going to be off for 3 or 4 months. Whatever. I used to think, the doctor would say to me, I'll be back in 3 months. I used to think I'll be back in half the time.
Yeah, and most of the time he was, as he's just pointed out, folks. I mean, we could sit here all day talking about all the big races you've won, AP. The Cheltenham Festival you mentioned there is like the Olympics for jumps racing. You won all the big races to be won there. But I think the race everybody here will probably remember most, the once-a-year punches. I'm sure quite a few won a few quid on it as well that are here today. Don't Push It in the Grand National in 2010. Just take us back to that day. How special was it? Was that your most enjoyable win amongst all the others in your career?
It made a lot of things happen for me. You know, I won Sports Personality of the Year because I won the Grand National. It wasn't my greatest achievement as a jockey was breaking Sir Gordon Richards' record in 2002. His record was there for 55 years. He was the winning most jockey of all time. And I broke his record in 2002, and that was my greatest achievement. Winning the Grand National, again, is one of those things. I used to write for the Daily Telegraph before they sacked me. Luckily, the Times gave me a job and they pay me more now, so that's all right. That's got nothing to do with it. But
what were you sacked for it?
I used to, yeah. I don't know what I was sacked for, to be honest. I must have wrote something I shouldn't have done. But Marcus Armitage used to write my column, and he won the Grand National on a horse called Mr. Frisk. And I promise you wouldn't let him sit in this stool, let alone ride a horse in the Grand National. So my theory in the Grand National is you need a lot of luck to win the Grand National. You know, you don't necessarily have to be. John Frankham never won the Grand National. Peter Scuddamore never won the Grand National. Charlie Swan, Irish champion jockey 10 times, never won the Grand National. A lot of better jockeys than me never won the Grand National.
But it was very important for you on your CV just to be able to tick it off, wasn't it? I would imagine you'd be a very agitated man now talking to us here today if you hadn't won a Grand National, would you?
Yeah, I would be. You know, and as I said, a lot of things happened because I won the Grand National, and it is the most famous horse race in the world, you know. And I always wanted to win. I always wanted to win everything, and you know, even I used to comfort myself by saying those other jockeys hadn't won it, and it'd be okay. That
just remind us how many goes you had at it.
20 in the end.
20.
It's not a great strike rate, 1 in 20, is it? But at least one of them won. But it was a great day, and it was probably the most enjoyable day of my career. But even until then, it probably wasn't until I rode my 4,000th winner. When I rode my 4,000th winner was probably the first time in my life that I had felt fulfillment in my life. That I think for a few weeks afterwards, I actually thought that I'd done all right. Even though before that I'd been champion jockey 17 or 18 times, but I used to think that anyone could be champion jockey. It wasn't that big a deal. Whereas when I rode my 4,000th winner, I kind of thought it was the first time that I actually let myself think that I'd done okay. All the other times it was just I used to think, yeah, somebody's done that before. Lots of people have won the Grand National before. I wasn't the first person to win the Grand National, or I wasn't. I always wanted to try and do something that anyone else hadn't done. And whoever's record that I was lucky enough to break, I always used to think to myself, even in the end, I was kind of racing myself. Mentally, I was trying to torture myself by thinking that I could beat myself. And at the beginning of this season, or of my last season, I rode my fastest 50th winner ever, my fastest 100th winner ever. I said to my wife one night when I was coming home, I was thinking, like, what have I been doing the last 20 years? Like, I'm doing it 20 years now, and I'm only getting the hang of it now. I used to think I must be a very slow learner. And I thought I was going to ride 300 winners, but I got injured in Worcester one night. I broke my collarbone and broke 2 of my ribs underneath it and punctured my lung. And I was mentally tortured. I went back riding after 4 days. Told the doctor it was fine. Was doing press-ups in front of him and everything. Look at me, I'm okay. And I got a fall then a week later, and I actually happened to ride, I think I rode 4 or 5 winners within the first 2 days that I came back. But I got a fall later on in the week, and I managed to make a right mess of it. And the doctor then sort of saw how bad it was, and that was the end of me riding 300 winners. And that was the first time, that was probably the most annoying thing in my life, that no jockey had ever ridden 300 winners in a season. In 2002, I had ridden 307 in a calendar year between January and January, but not in a season. And I thought, like, being in my 20th year, that I was actually going to do it. And then I got injured, and that completely, it was probably the first time in my life that I felt that I felt like I'd failed, or I felt that I was mentally tortured with something. But it wasn't actually the reason that I decided to retire. I actually had told my boss at the time, Chief McManus, the April beforehand, that it would probably be my last season riding, because I wanted to retire whilst I was still at the top. I wanted to retire while I was champion jockey. I wanted to retire while it kind of still hurt that I was able to do something that I was good at. I didn't want to be getting to the point where there's a couple of other lads that are better than me now, it's time to go. I think it's very hard for a sports person to walk away while they're still, I wanted to walk away while I was still champion jockey. A lot of sports people walk away when someone else is better than them, or someone else wins more than them.
Was it difficult, though? You mentioned there you were doing things you'd never done before. Was it difficult to call a halt when probably you were maybe achieving more than you ever had?
Yeah, it was difficult. It took me a long time to get my head around it. It's not something I'm not sure ever I'll get my head around it. But I'm a forward-thinking person. It's over. I don't look back. It's done. I was very lucky. I had a great career. I went to the Punchestown Festival 3 days after I retired. There was horses there that I could have ridden.
He told me this at the time, folks, this was part of his therapy after he retired, your own words. Did it work?
I'll tell you why it worked, because I spent the morning with John Thomas McNamara and Robbie McNamara, 2 lads, both paralysed, and before I went racing both days, I went and spent the morning with them, and I kind of thought, I've got very little to be worrying about retiring. I'm very lucky to be walking away from what I've had more falls than anyone else. I've ridden more winners than anyone else, but a lot of my colleagues used to point out to me that I'd ridden a lot more losers than anyone else. So I wasn't really theoretically any better than anyone else, because I had more chances than anyone else. And the fact that I had been lucky enough to work for all the great people, the likes of Martin Pipe, who incidentally said to me one day when I was at Taunton, he had a horse run at Taunton one day and it was walking around the parade ring, and it was a horrible looking little thing. And it just, I'd never seen it before anyway, but it had never ran before, but it was a horrible looking little thing anyway. And I said to him, "Is it any good?" And he said to me, he used to have a squeaky voice, he said, "Certainty, certainty." I went, "Really?" I said to him, "It doesn't look like much." And he stood back and looked me up and down. He goes, "You got any mirrors in your house?" And he goes, "See how many races you've won, I wouldn't buy you." He said, "Well," so my theory on horses looking good, Gary, went out the window after that. So looks aren't everything in sport.
Tell us, it's the best part of a couple of months now since you called it a day. You're getting used to it, I'm sure, more and more as each day goes on. Are you finding you're becoming viewed more and more of a nuisance around the house, for example?
Haven't been in the house for 2 months, to be honest. I've been lucky that I've done a lot of things that I was never able to do before.
Did you make plans for all this before you hung up your boots?
Kind of. I went on holidays for 10 days. Normally you go on holidays, the first 5 days are great, and the second 5 days you worry about how much weight you put on. So theoretically your holidays might be for 10 days, but they're really only for 5, because the second half of the holiday you spend up going to the gym or minding your weight. So this time, I went on holidays and didn't have a care in the world, didn't have to worry about whether someone else was winning while I was away, or got to do things I hadn't done before. Went to the FA Cup final, which is something I always wanted to do. I'm an Arsenal fan, so that was nice. They managed to win the FA Cup final. I went to the Epsom Derby, spent the day with Lester Piggott, which, as a kid, as a jockey growing up, you couldn't buy something like that. He was. I know someone mentioned him earlier. Pat Jennings and Liam Brady were two of my heroes growing up because they were Arsenal players. But as a jockey, Lester Piggott was my hero growing up. Spent Derby day with Lester Piggott. He'd ridden 9 Derby winners. He is the best jockey that ever lived. So a lot of things that I've now been able to do that I wasn't able to do. So I don't miss racing at all. I said at the moment I'll probably miss it more when Cheltenham comes along or when Aintree comes along. But at the moment, I know it was the right thing. I know that I could easily have carried on longer, but I didn't ever want to get to the point where people didn't think I was not as good as I was, or that dip that comes. I think it's very difficult for a sports person to walk away before the dip comes.
Yeah, and obviously there's that bit more opportunity now to spend time with the family, Chanel, the 2 kids, but maybe to come home to Moneyglass maybe a little bit more, because I know you would have ridden here in Ireland a lot over the years, but generally speaking, you're back to your base in Britain, whereas now maybe a chance to get home a little bit more, perhaps.
Well, my kids are definitely happier I'm at home more. I'm not sure about the wife, but the kids are definitely happier. And I was actually going to come over last night and go home to see my mum, but I was stuck in London for the day and I didn't get back till late last night. And I'm actually going back tomorrow because I'm going racing tomorrow at Ascot, and I'm not actually going to get home to see my mum, so I'm hoping that no one tells her that I'm here. So I'm going to try and sneak in.
Let's make a pact here now, folks. Omerta.
And my mum is the most nosiest person in the world, so she'll definitely find out.
Hold the Twitter, folks. Hold the Twitter.
Yeah.
Just finally, some of the people here will be aware. There is another AP McCoy coming along, believe it or not. What age is he now?
He's 21 months old.
21 months old.
Yeah.
AP's son, Archie. How's he doing, first of all? Because the little fella did have a little health scare. He's come through it okay.
Yeah, he had heart surgery when he was 6 months old. But he's flying now. And he's actually... The worrying thing is he looks more like my brother than he does like me. And because he's my brother's ginger haired, and Archie is looks like his son. And if you didn't know any better, you'd think my wife might have had an affair with him. But
it's definitely just as well your mother's not here, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Although someone did say to my mother once, "Oh, I saw your son yesterday." She said, "Oh, he's lovely, isn't he?" And she goes, "Yeah, it's the red hair." It wasn't me she was talking about at all. But yeah, he's good now. He's flying. Whether hopefully I'll get him into football or golf or something that's a little less dangerous than being a jockey.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, if he or indeed Eve, your daughter, had designs of maybe going into career in racing, not necessarily being a jockey. Say, for example, if young Archie did get an idea into his head that he'd like to emulate his dad, is it something you'd encourage, or would you be a little bit nervous about watching him?
Well, one of the reasons I give him the initials is Archie Patters. His name is because I thought if he was a jockey and he happened to be better than me, it wouldn't actually really, no one would ever really notice because he'd still be AP McCoy.
Continuity.
Yeah, so it was a little bit of a selfish part and a little bit of a selfish thing on my part to make sure that if he was good or better than me, it wouldn't hurt too much. But from a point of view of, I'd prefer if he played football. Or, I mean, I had the best way of life in the world. I wouldn't change it for anything. But I'm not sure I'd like to be. You know, I used to think when I was in hospital that it wasn't a problem. You know, but I know that everyone else who used to come in to see me wasn't so keen. You know, or I about 2 years before about 2 or 3 years ago, I got a fall one day in Cheltenham and I punctured my lung and broke 7 of my ribs and fractured my sternum. And I was in intensive care for about 7 days or something because I was getting pneumonia or something. I warned my wife that she wasn't allowed to tell anyone. And she said when I was, after like 3 or 4 days, I was obviously starting to feel a little bit better. She said, I said to her, you know, a good kicking does you good every now and again. And she just looked at me and thinking, yeah, it's about, he has had too many bangs in the head. So, but it was something to get used to, Gary.
Okay, well, it looks as though
something I don't miss, but something that I got used to.
It looks as though for the time being there might maybe just be only one AP McCoy, but we'll keep an eye out maybe 20 years down the line for young Archie if he does indeed maybe jump on top of a horse. AP, I think I speak on behalf of everyone here in the room saying it's been a wonderful pleasure to follow your career over the past 20 years. You've given us some great excitement, continued success into the future. Many thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. AP McCoy.